Next, President of the Nicholas County Board of Education. I'd like to call this regularly scheduled October the 5th, 2020 board meeting to order at this time. Would you please rise and join the board in a moment of silent reflection? It gives us opportunity to reflect on those things for which we have to be thankful, but also to clear our hearts and minds for the business we're going to consider here this evening. So a moment of silent reflection, please. Thank you. Thank you. Would you please join the board in saluting our country with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Item number 2 for this evening's agenda is approved minutes of meetings held, and we do not have any minutes to approve tonight. Item number 3, recognitions, discussions, and delegations. We do have one delegation to speak with us this evening. At this time, Katie Mertza, if you would, Katie, come over to the podium. If you would, just introduce yourself and give us your address for the record.
Okay.
I think we have 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Get my talk.
Okay, just hang on, she'll tell you what to say.
Last name spelled?
Murdza, M-U-R-D-Z-A, correct?
That's correct. Okay. Good evening. My name is Katie Murdza. I live at 310 Chestnut Hill Road in Summersville, and I am here tonight as a concerned parent regarding the reentry plan. I have 2 children at Gully River Elementary, and I teach pre-K there through the Head Start program. I feel the decision to accelerate in-class participation to 4 days was rushed. I agree in-class instruction is best academically, but not at the cost of our health and safety of our children and staff. It is my understanding the health department was against returning to 4 days this soon. Last week's positive COVID tests in the county school system raised my concerns even higher. Had we already been going 4 days, those numbers would have been higher. The return to 4 days without social distancing in the classroom is putting our children and staff at higher risk. CDC's own school reentry guidelines state full classrooms without social distancing falls in their high-risk category. I know the first 3 weeks of school have not been easy. They've been hard on everybody. They've been hard on the students. They've been hard on teachers and staff and parents. But we were just getting the kinks worked out. You know, we were finally getting all the iPad issues worked out. I feel we just didn't give it an adequate chance to work. Teachers hadn't had county grade group meetings to talk about what's working and what's not working and to share ideas. You know, students really didn't have that opportunity to acclimate to the new blended model. You know, I do have to brag on Gully River's teachers because they've really done some amazing things with distance learning. I feel going 4 days this early in the school year unnecessarily exposes our students, staff, families, and everyone to COVID-19, especially when our numbers are rising. My children are now in classrooms that can no longer social distance students, and unfortunately, we, like many other families, just don't have the luxury to choose total distance learning or homeschooling. I wish the decision would have been made after all parents and staff in the county had the opportunity to weigh in and provided with an opportunity to voice their opinions in a meeting such as this. I also wish the board would have had an opportunity to consult with medical professionals prior to making your decision. I know this is new territory for everyone, and these are very hard decisions to make. There are people on each side of this issue, and as a parent, I wanted to share my point of view with you. You know, I thank you, Mr. Amick and Mr. Moose, for voting against the decision, and I thank you all for your time this evening.
Thank you. Next, we have student recognitions, and it's, I'll cancel that as well. Okay.
Sorry, I have to tell you beforehand.
And so items A and B under recognitions, discussions, we're not having any of those, right?
Correct.
Okay, action items. Approval of policy BDR, school board meeting. Mrs. Atkins? By the way, you have that electronically, you received it electronically. It's the same policy we discussed 2 board meetings ago and presented from the committee on the school board meeting.
Yeah, we received no comments on this policy. It was on comment for 20 days. And I'll just kind of take you briefly through the changes there on page 1. Under annual meetings, those were really just technical changes, just to kind of clarify that meeting there in March is not an adjourned meeting. We actually have to recess. So that was just clarifying that language there. On page 2.
Page 1,
Yes.
rules of operation. The board shall utilize Robert's Rules of Order duly revised. I think that should say unless specified in the bylaws. Robert's Rules of Order says that a small group such as this does not require a second on the motion. But in the statements here, there is a revision to require a second on motion.
Well, the committee put that in because that has been the traditional operation of this board for years. We have a motion, the motion has a second, and then we discuss it, and then we take action on it. So you're right, the Robert's Rules does say that smaller than 12, you don't have to have a second, but we put that in policy, or this committee recommended we put it in policy because it is what we have been doing. It's our standard of operation, and over the past many years.
Yeah, the
Oh, I'm not objecting to that. I'm just saying that under those circumstances, the rules of operation need to be revised to say that we follow Robert's Rules of Order unless specified elsewhere in the bylaws, which is what...
Okay, in other words, that's stated otherwise in this policy, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, that's not a problem.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I don't think it's necessary, but it would cause no harm to add it.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't do it and I make a motion and you call for a second, I'm going to object.
Well, I don't...
Because Robert's Rules says...
Well, your Robert's Rules are a guideline for how you conduct a meeting. You and boards everywhere have different processes in place that aren't necessarily in line 100% with Robert's Rules of Orders. That's just your beginning guideline. If your rules are silent, that's what you follow. If you have a rule, it supersedes that. I mean, I think that's standard procedure.
I don't think what he's asking there, I think it's fine to say.
Yes.
Say that the board shall utilize Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in conducting all meetings unless otherwise stipulated in this
Rule or?
in this rule,
Okay.
in this policy. Because we're talking about policy. Would that be?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, on page 2, we added the words "if available," that the minutes of the previous meeting will be approved if they are available. And then under order of business, we substantially revised the order of how we conduct a meeting. We moved some things around. I think it makes it more efficient. Which that continues on page 3. On page 3, there's a new section there on voting, which, as Mr. Moose already pointed out, this clarifies that all motions need a second. It also states the effect that an abstention has on a tie vote. So in the event of a tie vote and you have an abstention, that motion shall fail for a lack of majority. And it also states that a motion lacking a second fails. It also specifies how votes can be conducted, either by voice vote or show of hands, unless you request a roll call vote. And it also states that a member can vote if they are present electronically. Prohibits secret ballot and proxy voting. On page 4, kind of clarifies electronic participation. I think this brings it kind of up to date. Our previous meeting, really there's been a lot of advances in technology since the policy was last revised. And this allows the board to authorize someone to participate electronically by majority vote. That way that prevents anybody from taking advantage of that policy. It requires that the person who's participating electronically has to be identifiable and heard clearly, and also that one member must be physically present at the meeting location. Page 5 changes the registration time to speak as a delegation from 15 minutes prior to the meeting till 10 minutes prior to the meeting. I think this brings us in line with the guidance issued by the West Virginia Ethics Commission. They say that you can't cut off sign-ups for delegations prior to 15 minutes till. So I think that brings us into compliance there. It also spells out that the agenda is at the superintendent's discretion. If people wish to be placed on the agenda, that's up to the superintendent. It reduces the amount of time each speaker has if they sign up as a delegation from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. And the rest of that process is the same. We've kind of changed the time. It used to be that if you had 6 speakers, then that was divided out by 5 minutes per each, but this changes it to 10 to represent the 3 members for a total of 30 minutes set aside for delegations. And in which case then that time can be extended by a majority vote of the members present. And it also clarifies that speakers may elect to yield their time to other speakers. That's kind of common practice in any board. If you watch C-SPAN and you see, Congress, they'll always say, "I yield my time." So that's widely accepted parliamentary procedure. On the next page, we basically just kind of condensed this language about public hearings to say that they will be conducted in accordance with applicable state code and West Virginia Board of Education policy, and states that if there's no code or policy, then the public hearings will be reasonably conducted to maximize public participation while maintaining order.
All that's marked out, is that West Virginia code?
I don't know if it's straight out of code. I mean, those things are found in West Virginia code. I don't know where that language came from.
Well, I don't understand the sentence that has been inserted there as well as I do if I read everything below there.
Well,
And I think the public would be the same. So I don't understand why we don't just keep what we have there in addition to the statement that in red, public hearings will be conducted in accordance with applicable West Virginia code. Why not just keep that and leave all the rest there so those of us that aren't familiar with that would be familiar with the conduct of public hearing?
I'm not sure where this language came from. I would have to double check that. However, state code and policy changes regularly. So if you leave in verbatim state code and the state code changes, then you have to go back and change a policy.
Well, if you have that statement, then that takes care of that.
Yeah, but if your policy contradicts state code, that can cause you problems. I mean, it's the board's purview. They can add this language in here if they want to add it back in there, or they can leave it as written.
Okay, this was put out for public comment 2 board meetings ago, I think it was. We had it went out for 20 days. That 20 days ended on Friday, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did we receive any public comments?
We received no public comments.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain any further discussion about the policy. We will make, if it's, the board concurs, this is a policy that was put together by a committee and brought to the board. We can alter the first statement on page 1 in regard to Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, in conducting all meetings except, how do we state that, Mrs. Atkins?
I said unless otherwise stipulated in, you said this policy, but really, there may be other places in policy where we differ from Robert's rules, so we
Anywhere
probably
in
ought
the
to say,
bylaws, anywhere in the bylaws, right?
or in NCBOE policy would cover it all.
Just in any other policy?
Yeah.
And that's this policy? That's
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, now, Mr. Moose has brought up a question there about that last section. And I think as we did look at that, things do change, and that was probably the basis for us pulling all that other language out. Because sometimes we get ourselves caught up in language that is not current with law, and so we just summarized it with that statement. Public hearings shall be conducted in accordance with applicable West Virginia State Code and West Virginia Board of Education policy. Where there are no applicable code or policy provisions, hearings shall be reasonably conducted to maximize public participation while maintaining order. So that was what the committee recommended, so I'll entertain any discussion in regard to whether you all want to go back and put that other language in, or keep the language that the committee recommended.
Are you asking me as well?
I'm just opening up.
You already know my opinion.
I'm opening it up for the board to discuss.
Okay.
Any thoughts?
I guess if it was cleared any, that part about the second, that's one, I think it was on the first page.
No, this is the next to the last page under public hearings.
The second report.
No, for public hearings. On the, next to the last page on the policy, we struck out, the committee recommended to strike out this language right here and replace it with the statement that public hearings shall be conducted in accordance with applicable West Virginia State Code and West Virginia Board of Education policy. Where there are no applicable code or policy provisions, hearings shall be reasonably conducted to maximize public participation while maintaining order.
Well, you keep up on all that, right, on all state codes and things? So you would be able to revise the simpler explanation for the layperson in the event that there was a change, wouldn't you?
You could, that could be done, but that sometimes takes some time, you know. I mean, we've had this 2 meetings ago. I mean, and it's up to the board. I mean, the board can, you know, make a motion and add this language back in. This is what the committee recommended.
I think he was saying that you would keep it on top of that. Is that what you're saying, Roy? But you would keep us abreast if anything was
Yes.
changing.
But I'm not 100% sure where this language came from. I don't recall the reasoning behind striking this out. I apologize.
In the policy revision that we're undergoing with, I forgot the name of the company now.
Neola.
Neola. This language, I don't recall it being there, these listing of these 5 things. Or
It was
6.
not.
So that's the guidelines they have been giving counties, is my recollection. But again, it requires somebody staying on top of this and then revising the policy, anytime that the code changes. And I tell you what, we ran into with this policy, we found many policies in the current manual that had not been updated since 1978. And so we're trying to just not make it just totally generic, but state what we want and to keep from having somebody constantly monitoring, because we don't always have somebody on staff to monitor that, if that makes sense. Any other thoughts or discussion? Okay.
I would recommend that you make the change in the languages that you want in form of a motion, just to cover our bases.
Okay. We'll call on you for that motion in a little bit, just to see what it's going to be. Hearing no further discussion, we'll run it as it is and take the vote and see how that goes. As the recommendation for the committee with those changes. And again, we had no responses during the 20-day comment period. Any further discussion on the policy? Hearing none, the next item under action items is to approve the contract with Andrea Williams. Mrs. Atkins, you want to, by the way, you received that at your desk this evening. You want to go over that, Mrs. Atkins?
Sure. This is actually the extension of a contract from last year. Ms. Williams assists the principal at Golly River Elementary with her SAT team meetings. That's the school assistance team meetings. This would allow us to pay Mrs. Williams to continue that service. She maintains all the necessary documentation. She does the scheduling. She contacts the relevant personnel and parents and makes sure that those things are conducted according to law and policy. And so it's pretty straightforward. At a rate of $125 per day, up to 8 times per month. And this is only for Golly River Elementary. And she did have this contract last year.
Is this handled through special programs?
No,
This
No.
is just a regular,
just a regular contract, yes.
the school assistance team would be, it's not an IEP type situation. It's just
No,
a
it
school
could
assistance.
lead to that, but not necessarily.
Gotcha. Any questions? And this is a continuation of the contract we've had with her last year.
Yes.
Any questions? Any further discussion in regard to the contract for Mrs. Williams?
She does a good job.
She does a good job there, she always has.
I might add also that Golly River Elementary, when I was hired, I did add a half-time assistant principal there. And when Pat was hired, I felt that she was experienced enough that she could manage without an assistant principal, and we agreed to having the special education supports. And so that's where Andrea Williams came in. So we went from a half-time assistant principal to someone on contract to help with special education. So it was a fair trade-off.
Okay. Any further discussion in regard to the contract with Andrea Williams? Okay, now, Mrs. Atkins, it sounded like we probably maybe need to have 2 different motions, one in regard to the policy, and then just one in regard to passing action item B. Is that what I'm hearing from you, that you'd like
Well,
to?
the changes, the recommended changes to the policy, adding the language unless otherwise stipulated in NCBOE policy. And if you want to reinsert the language there on the next to the last page, that should be done in the form of a motion
By itself.
by itself.
in regard to the board meeting policy, I didn't hear much discussion on whether you wanted to add back in the last part of it. Mr. Moose stated his opinion there, and I stated how we came up with it, but is there a desire to put that last part in there, or just move with the policy with the one correction in the first section? Any thoughts from board members?
Are you asking for a motion?
I'm going to ask for a motion to go ahead and get the right language with her.
Right, it would probably be better to address both changes in separate motions.
Okay.
Because someone may not have a problem with the change on page 1, but might object to the change the next to the last page or vice versa.
Okay, the first motion would be to approve the policy with the change to the language on the first page about Robert's Rules of Order. And then we do the second one in regard to the change on the last section of the policy. Okay, is there a motion to approve?
Well, I think you need to make the motion for the changes before you vote on the policy.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the change? On
No,
change
I'm
in
sorry.
language?
Somebody needs to move to adopt the language on page 1, and then that motion needs to be dispensed with in one way or another. Then you need to make a motion to deal with the next to the last page.
Okay, and then with the policy as a whole.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Moose, you want to make the motion in regard to the language on the first page?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have a motion to alter the change, to change the statement of on the first page of the policy in regard to Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay, Lloyd, can you repeat that, what the change you wanted there?
I've got it written down
Okay.
so that we make sure, unless otherwise stipulated in NCBOE policy. Does that accomplish? Okay.
Okay.
I'll second the motion. The President can second. So we have a motion and a second to adopt the language on page 1 as stated. Any further discussion in regard to that motion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, that motion passes unanimously. And that was Mr. Moose with making the motion. I seconded, and we all voted in favor of that. Now, what page was that?
It's the next to the last page. The pages aren't numbered. It's the next to the last page under public hearings.
Okay. Mr. Moose, you want to make a motion to change the, to reinsert the language, the original language that was in the policy previously?
Yes, sir, in addition to the added change.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion? Hearing none, the motion dies for lack of a second. Now, the third motion would be to approve the policy or accept the policy in its entirety
But as amended.
as amended. Is there a motion to accept the policy, the school meetings policy as amended? Is there a motion? Mrs. Kaufman moves. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Mr. Berry seconds. Is there any further discussion in regard to the policy? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the school board meetings policy signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, and we have 4 voting in favor. That would be Mrs. Kaufman, Mr. Penix, Mr. Amick, Mr. Berry, and Mr. Moose voting in the opposition to that. So 4-1. That policy passes. Now, is there a motion to approve action item B, the contract with Andrea Williams, as presented this evening?
So moved.
Mr. Mr. Amos moves, is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Mr. Moose seconds. Any further discussion in regard to the contract? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Like sign. Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously. Item 5 on this evening's agenda is finance. Mr. Hess, if you would come forward.
All righty, first item on the finance agenda is payment of current invoices, if you have any questions.
Hang on a second, let me get with you there. Any questions from Mr. Hess?
Hang on a minute, let me search.
Invoices? Go ahead.
Item B is the transfers and supplements. We have a few of those for this meeting. I'll run through those very quickly. First one, first two are some factoring Senate allocations and correction to the ALC factoring Senate. The next one is the Nicholas County Sheriff's Department. They donated $900 to each, or to the Nicholas County Board, $100 going to each elementary school to be spent at their discretion. So we are very thankful that they did that. And so that's what the second supplement's about, $100 to each elementary. The next one is the ESL program. It was $47.08 budgeted to supplies. The next three are, as you guys know, in the spring we budget a spring budget, which is an estimate, and it's put in very broad categories. And so when we get the actual grant award, we then go back and we budget it into detailed lines and locations. And so the first one there is Title II. We rebudgeted, transferred funds around to make that exactly the way Mr. Nichols wanted it. It was the difference of 31 cents from the original budget. However, we moved revenues or moved the expenditure budget around quite a bit. We did the same thing with Title II. It was 29 cents off from the original budget. And then finally Title I, which is several pages long. And I believe there's a difference of 4 cents on that. The next item are contracts. Actually, the next item on my agenda is bids. And so there's a bid in there for Mountain Vending. The principal there at Panther Creek is recommending them for their water machine. They're also recommending TSS Photography as for their school photos. And then Cherry River Elementary is recommending Life Touch for their school photos. And the last item there is D, which is surplus property. And we've had a few items from Nicholas County High School we'd like to ask the board to declare surplus. Any questions on those items?
What about the contract with Apple?
Well, it's not on the agenda, so I'll have to bring that to you next time.
Just pull that off, okay, so. Madam Secretary, that would be pulled as far as action.
The last item is the financial statement presentation for the year ending June 30, 2020. And so I have that on the screen for you, and
Let me get turned around.
okay. It was included in your packet. It's 78 pages long, and we're only going to go over 4 pages of the 78. But if you get tired of watching the water boil, the grass grow, or the paint dry, you can go back and check out the other 74 pages.
The deal.
There is a lot. I'll say this every year. There's so much in those 78 pages about the board. It answers a lot of questions from our employees and their benefits, to our assets, to our debt, to contingency items, all about our retirement. There's just a lot of data in there. So what I'm going to do is review there are 4 basic statements. And of those 4 different statements, they are broken down into 2 different categories. You have your fund statements, and then you have your district-wide statements. And your fund statements are basically like an annual financial statement, an annual summary of what goes on within the year, where your district-wide statements are a more big picture. It includes full accrual systems of all your assets, all your debt. It's more of a full-blown, in a lot of ways may provide a little better picture. If the Board of Education was going to end as of June 30th, you could look at that report and say, well, this is what assets we had on the records, this is the debt that the board had. The fund statements, which we're going to go over first, really doesn't get into that. It basically looks at the expenditures and the revenues within a year, and if revenues or expenses can be received or paid within 60 days after the year, it's considered realizable and it's included in these statements. Otherwise, it's not. So we're going to start with the income statement, and as you can see there are 5 funds that we operate here at the board. The most obvious one is the general fund, which is in column B. The special revenue fund, which is our federal and our state grants. In June, we started a Fund 71, column D, which is the CARES Act federal monies. Fund 21 is our debt service, and that's really just used to manage public debt. And in our case, only thing we have in there right now is a loan from the governor. And then column H is our capital improvements fund, and that's where we keep track of projects, building projects of $500,000 or more. So we're primarily going to look at the general fund, and if you have any questions along the way, just stop me and we'll try to answer those for you. But if you look there in column B, you can see that we had property tax revenues of a little over $10 million, other local sources of $770,000, state sources, which is your state aid, of $28 million, and then a little bit of federal revenue of $219,000, for a grand total of $39,557,299 in general revenue.
Where would the 11.9 million discretionary fall?
It's coming up the bottom. When we get to that part, it's in the equity section, which I'll point that out to you. And you can see in the other funds the different revenues and the different categories that those are put in. A grand total of $52 million for the FY 2020 year. Then we skip down to the expenses. Expenses are in the same way. We categorize those by program function, and you can see in column B, the majority of our expense is in instruction, $21.7 million. The remainder of that, your support services, for students, instructional staff, general administration, so on and so forth. A big chunk of that is in school administration, maintenance, and transportation. Then we can talk about our food services. Our food service program is in the special revenue fund, which is column C, and that's because the majority of, or most of, or a lot of the funding for the food service program are federal dollars. So you can see there that we spent $3.4 million in food service program last year, which is a little high. Most of the time it's less, but we had the COVID-19 boxes, which were a little more expensive to purchase, and we'll be reimbursed for that additional cost though. One thing about food service is the Fund 11, our general fund, we have to make up any deficiencies. So whatever we spend in food service and what we're not reimbursed through the federal and state grants, county has to chip in and make that program break even.
Is instruction payroll?
Yes, anybody, instruction would be anybody, any regular ed teacher, special ed teacher, vocational, alternative, adult ed, any type of teacher.
Okay, on page 51, it says payroll is $20,888,152. What is this? Does this include substitutes or something that makes it different?
Yes, this would include substitutes. This would also include any type of instructional supply. So if you just think of instruction as a whole, it could be all your teachers, all your instructional aides, all your supplies, anything other than the other categories below, essentially. So it's all encompassing. So in total there, you're looking at about almost $4.5 million in instructional supplies spent. Moving on down, you can see there that we had debt retirement of $402,000, and then total expenditures in Fund 11 of $36,196. So when you take a look at what revenues was brought in or recognized minus the expenditures, the difference between our revenues and expenditures shows $3,561,000 in the black. However, there are other things that come into play before we can get to that bottom line. Mainly in this next section under other financing sources, we transfer monies around between the funds. Like I said, and the biggest transfer out of the general fund is the food service program. And so we transferred about $800,000 last year out of the general fund over into the special revenue fund to cover those costs. So you see $1.8 million transferred out, and of that 1.8, it went into a variety of different funds there. This is a little quirky thing about the transfers. Sometimes we transfer within the funds. And so we have intra-fund and inter-fund transfers. So we may, in the general fund there, you see $868,000 transferred in. Well, they are part of that transfer out below is coming from the same fund. We're just, for example, in our levy, we have $100,000 a year to keep for facilities and capital improvements. And so the revenues come in the general fund. However, we don't want to commingle that with our other funds, so we do an intra-fund transfer to put it in a separate line within the same fund so that we keep it separate. So in that little section there, you can see there in the general fund, the net of all the transfers is net transfer out of $914,000. And then when you compare that to what we had above of the 3.5 minus the 914, the net amount that we'll realize as an addition to fund balance is $2,647,107. So, that's good. You ended the year in the black in the general fund. And so what we do with that $2.6 million, we add it back to our equity. And equity sometimes is referred to as several different things. We call it contingency sometimes. Sometimes we call it surplus. Sometimes we call it fund balance. But as you can see, we ended last year with $14,746,000 fund balance. We're then going to add the $2,647,000, which will give us an ending fund balance of $17,393,877. So, got to remember that number because you're going to see that on the balance sheet, which is our next form. Remember the 17 million? When we get down here,
So that's an all funds balance.
that's all fund balance. That's the total fund balance as of June 30th. So there's your $17 million number, just at the bottom under total fund balance. So one of the first things you learn in accounting is what you own, your assets, minus what you owe, your liabilities, is what you're worth. That's your equity. That's your fund balance. So we start here with our assets, or what we own, in Fund 11, and that's $19,679,000 as of June 30th. We had taxes receivable of $2.4 million, and so that money's is your real estate, your personal property taxes that was not collected as of June 30th. And so if it is realizable within the first 60 days, then you count that as revenue. Otherwise, you count it as a deferred inflow. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But anyway, the remainder of those assets are primarily monies that was owed to us or items that we had prepaid. So our total assets on these fund statements on the general fund as of June 30th was $23,710,000. Now, that's what we owned. That was our assets. So what liabilities did we have? Well, we owed our employees for their July and their August paycheck. That was $2.9 million. We owed EIA for those 2 months of premiums. We had some other operating accounts payables there. So in total, we owed $3.8 million in liabilities. And then you see the next line there that says deferred inflows. That's basically our taxes that was uncollectible. Those taxes at June 30th was not paid before the end of August. So under these accounting principles, you don't recognize that as revenue because you didn't receive it within the first 60 days after the end of the year. So it'll sit right there in that account until we receive it. Once we receive it, then we'll move it into revenue. So now we get down to what you're worth. And so basically on these fund statements, remember we said your fund balance was $17 million. But there are some things out of that $17 million that you have to have reserves for. The very first one there for $79,000, we had prepaid some insurance, our flood insurance and our liability insurance in May and June. And so you recorded that as an asset, but really you can't consider that equity because it's for a future period. So you have to reserve that out of your equity, so you subtract that out. Your next section are your restricted funds. Restricted funds represents monies that we have that are restricted by an outside source. So anything for the excess levy, any grant that we have that is to be spent a certain way beyond the board's control, we restrict that out of our equity. So that was $2.5 million. Then our committed funds are funds that the board has control over, but you set aside in a certain way. So there's $5.1 million there that we have pulled aside for particular projects or it is in some way earmarked for a particular item. Like I mentioned, our excess levy. There's a certain line in there that's reserving that money to be spent for those capital improvements. Actually, that's in the restricted part. The 5.1 would be any other small projects you all might have set aside.
Would that be where we also come up with funds to balance or to state the budget for the following, for the next year?
You could, of that $5.1 million, probably 80% of that, you could change any of it, but about 80% of it, you have the flexibility to change your mind, essentially. The other 20% is kind of earmarked for something that probably could not easily be changed. But yes, you could access those funds to help balance the budget if necessary. That's our second, we would go to that as a secondary source.
Well, levy's in restricted.
Levy has been restricted, yes, it's in that second line, the 2.5.
Okay, right.
Any levy funds that's not been spent as of June 30th that was due, it's in that line, holding it out. And then assigned funds are funds that basically we've not paid, like what they are purchase orders. We have committed to purchase something, but we haven't received it yet, nor we haven't paid it. So there was $136,000 in encumbrances that we were obligated. So really, we don't have the flexibility to spend that either. So of the $17 million, we have to restrict out those items. And then that leaves you $9,570,656 as unassigned. And that's to do with at the board's discretion. So,
But wait, what, on page 1 it says there's 11.9 million available in
okay,
the
so
discretionary fund.
look right up here on the screen. If you look across all funds, there's your 11.9.
Okay, gotcha.
So we're not finished yet. I'd like to say that you have $9.5 million in unrestricted funds, but we have to go a little bit further here and take a look at what, that was as of June 30th. So what have we committed to, or the board committed to, or what's coming down the pipe that you need to be prepared for? So you can see on the first line there, that was your unassigned balance, $9.5 million. On July 1, and that was as of June 30th. On July 1 of this year, we had to take $1,278,148 out of there to balance this year's budget. And that's what we do. We use approximately that, usually it's about $1 million, but last year was $1.2 million. So that had to come out of your contingency account, if you will. Then the state recommends you have a 3 to 5% contingency set aside for emergencies. And so 5% of our expenses is almost $1.9 million. So once you take those two items out, you are left with $6,392,000. Now in a couple months, I'm getting ready to start next year's budget. And so if nothing changes, if the revenue stays the same and the expenses stays the same, then we're going to need another $1.2 million to balance next year's budget. And so it's going to have to come out of this contingency. So you need to be thinking about that. The next item is loss of enrollment. We have a loss of enrollment. That will definitely be a factor that you'll have to consider. And our state aid pays, it's right at $5,800 or approximately $6,000 per student. And so we always tried, the board in the past has always tried to match our incoming revenues with the with cuts to live within our means. And so we'll be looking at that, our enrollment, and making adjustments accordingly. The other thing to consider, the unknown costs associated with the new construction. We don't know what the utilities are going to cost to run the new school. We don't know what our personnel needs are going to be. So that's an unknown at this point. COVID-19, we don't know where we're going to be at the end of that. We've already spent $1.2 million out of your contingency over and above the $1.2 million CARES grant. So that's going to have to come out. That really should probably be up in the top part. And then in discussions with our assessor, he said, you know, you're probably going to be okay this year, this next school year, but the following year, the assessed values are going to bottom out because all of this pipeline inventory that's in Nicholas County will not be here year after next. And so he told me last year that there will be a material decrease in our assessed values, which will directly offset, decrease our excess levies funds. So with just those few things, you can see that we have an unassigned fund balance of 9.5 and can quickly drop that to right at $4 million. So those are just some things to keep in mind as we move forward in the decisions.
You say we spent $2 million more than the CARES?
1.2.
1.2.
1.2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's in addition to the 1,268,000.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We altogether, I just added up this morning, we spent almost $2.4 million in COVID-related expenses so far, and we got a grant for a little over $2 million. So we spent as much as the grant, spent double the grant basically, and we don't know where that's going to end exactly. Looking at, I also did some comparisons on our total expenses. Certainly you would think that we were out of school in March and that some of our expenses would be less, but in fact we spent $3 million more this year than we did last year. And in a lot of those areas, some of it was in salary, some of it was in purchase services, technical services. We did some maintenance during that time period. So some areas increased, while some other areas decreased. Our dental optical went down, our professional educator services was down, transportation expense and transportation repairs was down, diesel was down. So it really had an impact, and I really expected somewhat of a savings, but it didn't pan out that way.
So if all that went down, then what was cost more?
Well, your salaries was higher. A lot of the times where we could monitor, like we didn't cut anybody's pay. And so we're typically, in some instances where someone would get paid for extra students, for example, well, and you only paid them for the days the kid was there, well, you paid them for every day during the time of COVID. There was just, I'd have to go back and look at the specific areas and salaries as to why that was more, but it was obvious when I was going down through there. Payroll was increased. Maintenance supplies, we did more maintenance work during that time period.
Or the computers on that?
Most of our computers you're going to see come in this year. We actually paid for them in this year. We didn't make a round before June, but it wasn't, the bulk of it was in July, wasn't it?
Most of it was about $700,000.
Would that not come out under the CARES money?
Yes, right, it will. It will be under the CARES.
Another thing I was going to ask you too was the repairs to the pods. We were only supposed to be in those, about 4 years, and we're having some problems with them, and the repairs to that's probably a big expense as well, correct?
It is. We absorb all of those repair costs.
And have you put any kind of projection in there for?
I haven't. It's just built into the maintenance budget. As I see the maintenance, as I monitor that, and so, I compare from year to year. So as time goes on, or if Rocky can tell me, hey, we're going to have to replace a building or half the building, then I'll make a budget for that. But typically, it's just kind of historically looking at the repairs incurred.
I know you've had like 2 or 3 pretty good sized repairs here recently. the flooring at the middle school and the awnings, I guess, at the Richmond High School.
Well, that's, I mean, we have insurance for the Ridgewood High School
Canopy.
canopy. And if I'm not mistaken, Summersville Middle School, those contractors actually covered the cost for repair on that.
The Summersville Middle School,
Floor repair in the kitchen.
in the kitchen, yes, the contractor came in and fixed all of that on the contract.
Really?
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, that was great.
Out there.
Kevin, what about the penalty that the county has been paying for years, the levy, where we thought we were paying our teachers, but then the state just cut us short? Was that on there somewhere?
That is absorbed through your salary costs. You see that in the form of a salary. We don't really pull that out where you can see it, but yes, part of this state basic salary includes Nicholas County's contribution to that state basic salary. So if I explain this correctly, in 1984, the state came up with a certain amount teachers were going to make. And if you had an excess levy or some other funding source in place at that time, and you were paying your teachers down here somewhere, but it brought them up to this level, then when the state passed that, they said, okay, everybody's going to start, we're going to bring everybody to this level. So they made us include and continue to pay the amount that the taxpayers had passed prior to 1984 in part of the state basic pay scale. Now, even though our taxpayers here was paying a certain portion of that, still wasn't enough to come up to the state minimum. So the state chipped in additional dollars to bring Nicholas County up to that minimum, like they did every other county in the state that was doing that, or was down below that amount. So how that flows through us is you don't see as much state aid coming in as could, because we are responsible for that $312,000. And as far on the expense side, you see that, we're paying it out to all of our teachers. It's part of what the county has to come up with every year.
That's dirty pool. And
That's the way it was done back in the day.
I know, we promised that in the levy.
What if we take that out at the next levy? What would be the penalty for that?
I believe, and you'd have to check legally, I believe a levy has to be down financially, a financial hardship where, the levy would have to be completely fail it will be gone for one whole year before the state would come in and pick that up.
So they got us on a downhill full.
Well, yeah, our levy's $4.3 million, so you give up $4.3 million to gain $312,000. So it's a tough spot.
Kevin, I want to go back to the 1.268 million that on COVID expenditure. That's how much we received under the CARES Act, about that amount, is that correct?
1.263, is that what you said?
Something like
You
that.
say, and yes, and 1.2 and some change, yes.
So we have almost doubled the expenditures on COVID-9, and the other 1.2, of course, came out of local funds, okay? But what type of expenditures caused us to go that far beyond? I mean, we know we bought the computers under the CARES Act, we paid for some other services, and some of the food service, no doubt, during the summer would have come from that. But
just personal protection, hand sanitizers, masks, desk shields, temperature,
Things in the door.
things in the door,
What about the cleaning, spraying?
the spraying the guns to sanitize. We may have hired some people to help with that as well. It really adds up quickly.
okay, but the majority of the original $1.2 million probably went to the computers.
I don't know if, the majority of that I would say
About
is.
780,000.
Okay,
Do we still have money left in that? Any CARES money, or we spent it all?
Oh, I'm sure, technically it's gone. I mean, if you could pull it line by line, you might see a few dollars left here and there in certain areas that's budgeted, but we spent 2.4, so it's long gone.
Now, that's not gonna change next year, or throughout this year, except for that amount for the iPads, right? So we
You also, your
probably anticipate
technology
another 1.2 million.
was about 80,000 for the fever detectors, metal detectors. So you're looking at about 850 in technology. That won't be reoccurring.
Some things, the desk, some of the desk protection and some things that have a longer life, naturally we wouldn't have to. But yeah, cleaning supplies is not going to end. It won't be $1.2 million, I wouldn't expect it to be. But certainly our cleaning supplies and manpower to do that is going to remain.
So
Are
you
you hearing
expect,
anything from your bus drivers? Are they being supplied with enough things, in this?
I've not heard any complaints.
Rocky has made sure, it's a priority to make sure that our schools have supplies and as well as the buses. So that's not something we would cut anyone short on, for sure.
I think, I spoke with him the other day, they're wiping down the buses after every run, every single run.
are you expecting more CARES money?
I don't know. I don't know if we will get it anymore or not. I haven't heard anything.
There's a lot that hasn't been released yet, I mean, from the state level, from the, $1.2 billion they received. I was wondering if we'd be receiving anything else from that.
Yeah, I would hate to estimate if we're, or even say if we're expected any of that.
I know today I got a letter from Justice where they're going to start, I guess, helping people out with like utility bills and stuff like that, the ones that, they can turn them off for a while now, that they are. Everything on that today, so I guess I'll be releasing some of that money now towards that. So I'm sure they have other things, but I mean, if they would pass another relief bill, then we should get some more funds.
I think so.
If that happens.
So that kind of drives a little bit, gives you a little better idea as to, of your unassigned funds, which is on your financial statements, the $9.5 million, the types of things that we know, and the types of your forecasts, that what's ahead of you to consider as we move forward. So I wanted to share that with you as far as breaking down that number in as much detail as I could provide.
But the two things on there that that might come out of that $3,914 are unknown cost with new construction and expected material decrease in assessed values, like what we're going to get from taxes.
You're right. You can probably expect something from all of those, really. I can't see the future, but just kind of thinking through things and looking into the future, I would expect to see contingent items in those areas affect your bottom line. And so you all just need to be thinking about that. The assessed values, I don't really expect that to happen in this next year, but we need to be prepared for, in the following year.
And I know too that the recommended contingency, that's something you have to have on hand every year, right? You have to 3 to 5% every year, right? It's
Well,
not just a one-time thing.
It's a one-time thing in that it'll change every year, so that is 5% of last year's expenses. So next year, I'll look at 5% of this year's expenses, and I'll try to hold that amount. So it may go up or down, but it's always going to be a reserve out of your unassigned funds. And so, we have fronted so much money. We had monies to immediately get computers, to immediately start on PPE stuff, to front some of the school disasters. So you hope that you never need it, but you almost have to have a little pot of money for emergencies. And we're more fortunate than a lot of counties across the state that we have what we do have, really.
But haven't they started making you do that? mean,
I don't know that it's a requirement, but it's highly recommended.
I think they did make it a requirement, but
Did they?
I was told they didn't.
They may have.
Is most of the 11.9 million contingency fund already in the budget? Is it spent or?
No, it's available. It's sitting there in a contingency account. And it's really like, the 11.9 represents all those other 4 funds that you really don't have the flexibility to spend the 11.9. You have the flexibility to spend that 9.5. And then from that 9.5 is what I was trying to drill down and show what you really have once you take these other contingent items out. So. So if you will allow me to show you 2 more statements. That is your fund statements, and it breaks our activity down in between those 5 funds. And it kind of shows you that summary on an annual basis, as I said before. Now, the district-wide, we take into account everything. This is the big picture of Nicholas County Schools. And if you look here, this is your statement of activities, or basically your income statement. You can see here your total expenses is $41 million for last year, and it's broken down into the same categories. Some of the numbers are a little different because we are accruing expenses that wasn't necessarily accrued in the fund statements. Then we go to the right and we break down revenues, and there are 3 different categories for revenues: your charges for services, your operating grants and contributions, and your capital grants and contributions. And they're kind of trivial in the big picture of things, because when you compare your revenues versus your expenditures, you can see we're $29 million short. But the revenues that's not included in those 3 categories are right here, which is your local taxes, your state aid, investment earnings, and unrestricted grants and contributions. We had gain on sale of fixed assets there, and then we have some transfers in and out that offset each other. And we come down to this point on these statements. You can see that your net income, if you will, is $6.9 million. And so then we add that to our equity, and our equity on the district-wide statements for last year, which again, we're going to talk about this. This includes all your buildings, all your debt, everything the board owns. If we ended today, this would kind of paint you a picture of where and how the board stands. But your beginning equity was $36,808,000. We had a small $15,000 prior period adjustment on some land that wasn't valued correctly, so we corrected that to restate the beginning balance at $36,823,733. We add our $6.9 million to come up with a grand total or net position of $43,742,364. So remember that number, $43 million. We jump over to our balance sheet, just like we did on the other one, the $17 million number. Get this to go down. There's right there at the bottom, our total net position. Wow. $43,742,364. So let's talk about that just a little bit. It's really slow, Chris. Or delay or something. All right. Again, what you own minus what you owe is what you're worth. So we're looking up here at our total assets. We start with our cash, $25.8 million. That's all the funds added together. You can see your receivable for taxes and your other receivables. And we get down here, the main, big change here is we start looking at, we added our land value. And all this land and building is all valued at cost. So $307,000 in land, land improvements, $1.9 million, buildings, $41 million, furniture and fixtures, 4.5, vehicles, 5.8, construction in progress, which is basically on the new school construction. It's really not lumped in up here yet because it's not complete. So we keep track of it, but it's in its own little line until it's done. That's what we paid for those items. This is what it's depreciated out, $31 million. So your net capital investment is $28,600,000. Now, the market value on that might be completely different. This is just what you paid for it, depreciated over 39 years. But that is part, or that's a factor in these district-wide statements. So we add our other assets from the top, and you can see your total assets are $61,532,000. Then we subtract out what we owe. Oh, I'm sorry, there's some deferred outflows, I'm sorry, $1.4 million related to OPEB and pensions. So your total assets and deferred outflows is $62,980,000. Then we subtract out our liabilities. Again, we owed our employees some wages for July and August, some PEIA premiums. That is $91,265. That is vacation days that about 20 or 25 people haven't been able to take. So we have to accrue that as a liability to the board. Accounts payable. Then we get down here to our debt. We owe $4.5 million in short-term debt, which includes the governor's loan. And as soon as we get that money back from FEMA, we'll be paying that back. That's why most of that is 4.1 represents the governor's debt. The remaining amount represents the payments that we have on long-term debt that will occur next year. Our long-term debt is $3.5 million. And so you add some other pension liabilities and some different calculations here. So our total debt is $16 million. $61 million in assets, my $16 million in debt. And here you add in these inflows, so you're really at $19 million in liabilities and inflows. Inflows and outflows are basically revenues or expenses that are not earned at this point, or they're a future expense beyond the scope of these financial statements. So we get down into the bottom. This is your equity section, your contingency section, in the big, looking at it from the big picture. So your capital assets represents all your buildings minus your debt. So if that was all taken care of, the net value on your capital assets would be $20,531,000. Again, we have some restrictions. Restrictions for special projects, restrictions for excess levies, and things that are reserved out of the other funds, like the special revenue fund of 7.8. And on these statements, you have unrestricted, which is the same as our unassigned that we talked about on the fund statements, of $15.2 million. So the picture's a little bit better here, but you're taking into account non-cash type items. The value you have in your land, the value you have in your buildings. You're adding that to your equity. So
basically, that's what the board's work, or that's what the board.
when you drill right down to it, it's as of June 30th, if the market value was what you had on the books, yeah, that's what you'd be worth. Yeah. But you know, there's so many things change. But a balance sheet is just a snapshot of how your financial position on a certain day. So As of June 30th, all those calculations put together, that's what we came up with. And those are your four main statements. Again, I think this is probably the most important. This is where you kind of need to look as you plan. Kind of keep a handle on where you're at with your discretionary monies. Any questions for me?
I think the key thing keeping in mind there is that if our enrollment drops, per student, we'll lose about $6,000. We're going to have to come up with something out of that bottom line, $3.9 million, to take care of loss of enrollment for the next school year.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
actually going to present on that. He had it written in, and I asked him to wait because I haven't had a chance to present it to you yet, so.
what we always do, and it's usually, it's about this time. I'll get with Melissa and say, hey, we lost this many students. We lost this much in assessed values, or we're predicted to. This is what I'm looking at. I'm going to have to cut the budget. And so then they'll work diligently to try to find cuts in personnel. We'll try to find cuts in overhead. Worst case scenario, you reduce facilities. And so it's tough.
Kevin, these county funds that you had, that you said that's taxes, unpaid taxes, do those taxes usually get paid, or is that property that a lot of times you see in the paper that people go pay a little bit of taxes to get?
Well, so your personal property taxes that businesses pay, or even individuals, unless the sheriff enforces the payment of that, then that might just, or if people file for bankruptcy, then that just might be lost funds. However, taxes on real estate, that does eventually get paid because it's sold and at the courthouse, and those taxes are finally paid. So of the 2.4, I don't have the breakdown with me, how much of that's real estate and personal property, but eventually we'll get some of that. Last year, I think it was 1.9, 1.8, so whether it was COVID related or people didn't have the money, you can see an uptick in the receivable balance just from one year to the next.
Those 90 students that were unaccounted for at the high school, how long do we have to account for them or find them?
Well, we know where they are, they just haven't been doing any work. So we have the social workers out contacting them. I'm not sure how many they've actually contacted so far, but since the board did move forward with the policy, we are getting some responses now because people know that we can bring them back into the school system. So we're starting to get responses. So we know where they are, they're on our rosters. Tammy Gregory's been tracking down students. She can, provide an update on how many students we have that are actually homeschooled. I'm going to give you a list of how many we've lost this year. We certainly have some challenges.
Any other questions on your financial statements? There's a lot in there.
Sure, I'm glad you didn't go over all 58.
78.
70. Mr. Chance, let me thank you and your department for the fine work you do on managing the finances of this Board of Education. You've done an excellent job for the nearly 20 years you've been here, so it is 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
20 years.
Thank you.
And we do appreciate you and the work that you do, and thank you, Annette, for that presentation.
You're welcome.
And I would say, board members, if you have any questions, you can also call Kevin, and we will be glad to answer those questions. In regard to finances, is there a motion to approve finance items A, B, C, D, and E, which includes the financial statements? Is there a motion to approve them as presented? Mr. Amy moves. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Mr. Berry seconds. Any further discussion in regard to financial matters? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously. Mrs. Atkins, Madam Superintendent, board members, is there a need for an executive session regarding personnel?
A short one. I don't think it'll take very long.
Okay.
Just jinx this, well, I jinxed this, okay, I don't know how long it'll take, but yes, we do need it.
Okay. Is there a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel prescribed in West Virginia State Code? Mr. Andy moves, and I'll give Mrs. Kaufman the second, if that's okay with you. You said, okay, Mrs. Kaufman seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, it's unanimous vote, and we're in executive session at 6:29 p.m. Executive session. Mrs. Kaufman moves. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Mr. Berry seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Madam Secretary, the motion is unanimous. We're out of executive session at 7:01 p.m. Mrs. Atkins.
You have before you the updated personnel agenda. It has been made available to the public here, but I will read the changes. Under service, that's Josh Meadows to an employee in the position of custodian 3 at Glade Creek Elementary School, effective October 7th. Robin Wilson, employee in the position of cook 1 at Golly River Elementary School, effective October 7th. Dolly Bragg, employee in the position of long-term substitute cook at Richwood High School, effective October 7th. Under professional extracurricular, Cameron Hornsby, employee in the position of head girls basketball coach at Nicholas County High School. On page 2, Sarah Weber resigns her position as teacher with Nicholas County Schools, effective August 16th, 2020. David Mike Bergnoli resigns his position as custodian with Nicholas County Schools, effective October 5th, 2020. And on page 3, we added Kendall Stearns to substitute custodians, effective September 28th. And on page 4 are leave requests from staff.
Are there any questions for Mrs. Atkins in regard to the personnel list presented this evening? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the personnel agenda as presented?
I'll make that question. That
Oh, yes.
step 3 pay for math and science is listed on there also.
Okay.
Back page.
Yeah, April Davis, BRE. That was the only one.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Mr. Berry moves to approve the personnel agenda as presented. Is there a second to the motion? Mrs. Kaufman seconds. Any further discussion regarding the personnel agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, the motion passes unanimously. We're down to superintendent's information, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Teacher at this time.
Pass these out to each of you.
And pass this down to Mr. Any other? You did?
I did.
You have one, Kim?
I did. Sound so muffled when I talk. Okay. The first thing I'd like for you to look at is a document called Process of Nicholas County Health Department Quarantine Notification through Nicholas County Schools. You'll find at the bottom of this that Kelly Amy, she is the nurse at the health department who signed off on this. I just received some communication a minute ago, so I'm not sure how accurate this is actually going to be by tomorrow. But I will read to you exactly the process that we have been following, and we will continue to follow unless I provide you with an additional update. So as far as if the school is notified of a positive COVID case, so if someone calls us and tells us there's a positive case in your school, we immediately contact the Nicholas County Health Department. And then the health department determines if there is a positive case. Then the Nicholas County Schools will do the contact tracing within the school environment per agreement with the Nicholas County Health Department. So we agreed when to work with the Nicholas County Health Department in doing the contact tracing because we have the student schedules, we have the names, we have all the contact information. And I just would feel better having our staff do the contacts versus us, handing over, rosters to the health department. So anyway, they've been appreciative of that, and we don't mind doing that. Nicholas County Schools, we do make the initial contact, but that contact is on the behalf of the Nicholas County Health Department with individuals within the school system who have been determined to be a close contact warranting quarantine as defined by the Nicholas County Health Department. Now this is where it gets a little confusing. So we have the CDC guidelines, we have the West Virginia DHHR guidelines, and we have the Nicholas County Health Department that follows those guidelines, and then of course they can interpret theirs to maybe be a little stronger than in some counties, and that's where it gets a little different. Some counties are doing things a little differently, and again, that comes down to the local health department decision. So I'm just recapping what our health department has asked us to do. So a close contact is defined by the West Virginia DHHR as a person who was within 6 feet of someone who has COVID-19, even if they did not have symptoms for at least 15 minutes, provide care for someone who is sick with COVID-19, had direct physical contact with someone who is sick with COVID-19, shared eating or drinking utensils with someone who is sick with COVID-19, got respiratory droplets on them through sneezing, coughing, shouting, etc., from someone who is sick with COVID-19, and was in the same class or group as a person with COVID-19. Now think about the last statement. That's the one that's causing some confusion in our community. When it says, that is coming from West Virginia, the DHHR guidelines, that if it's someone in the same class. So that means that if we have one individual in a class, let's just say we have one student, according to this, and as our health department has directed us, everybody within that class, including the teacher, is to be quarantined for 14 days. So when you're in an elementary school, it's a little different because those students stay in one core group. So if you have one student in one class, chances are you're going to have just one class that will be quarantined. If you have let's just say a high school student who moves around and has 8 different classes, there's 8 different classes to be quarantined with 8 different teachers and the bus driver who drove that student to and from school. So we've effectively knocked out 10 Nicholas County Board of Education staff members with quarantine and the students. Okay, that's what's confusing. In some counties, the quarantine has been taken to the point that, example that was given to me over the weekend by another superintendent, a bus driver was diagnosed with COVID-19, and instead of the entire bus being quarantined, it was 3 rows back behind the driver. The rest of the students were free to go on their way. Students who have COVID-19, it doesn't cause the teacher to be quarantined if the student has been outside that social distancing mark. So that has caused some confusion with our counting, and I just think it's really important that everyone understand that this is the guidelines from the state, and then this is the way our health department has interpreted to move forward with the class grouping and the quarantining. So quarantine defined by the West Virginia DHHR and Nicholas County Health Department says staying home from work, school, and/or activities when a person is a close contact of someone with COVID-19. Quarantine lasts for 14 days unless the person develops symptoms, then they will be put in isolation. And then suspending in-person learning for a classroom criteria by West Virginia DHHR and Nicholas County Health Department guidance. In-person learning for a single class core group should be suspended when there is a student or staff member with confirmed case of COVID-19 and it is determined by the local health department that all members will be quarantined 14 days. So you can see I put in parentheses that the Nicholas County Health Department has requested the Nicholas County Board of Education to notify those in the classrooms and/or school buses that have a positive COVID case to quarantine. Again, that's not the Nicholas County Board of Education quarantining people. We have no say in that. That is the Nicholas County Health Department. But they are requesting that when we provide our notice, that we notify all individuals. And of course, we have complied with that. Within 72 hours, contact tracing and notice of quarantine contacts will be provided to the Nicholas County Health Department by the Nicholas County Board of Education. So we have to make sure that all names are provided to the health department within that time frame. And the last statement is the superintendent reserves the right to close schools when conditions are detrimental to the health, safety, or welfare of pupils, i.e. staff shortages which may occur due to quarantining, etc. So in the situation, as I explained, is just giving you an example for high school. Quite honestly, we could have 8 teachers quarantined from one student infection. And if we don't have the staff to properly, operate a school, then I can't have classes. And that goes to custodians as well. Because with this pandemic, we're relying heavily on our custodians to keep our schools clean. And if we don't have enough custodians to keep the schools clean, if we don't have enough bus drivers to drive students, and if we don't have enough teachers to teach students, we can't have school. So, and cooks as well. And some of the quarantining, you have to understand, may come as a result of contacts from outside the school system. So even though, let's just say you have 8 teachers outside the school system and someone else has to be quarantined from exposure, it doesn't take very long to really cut into the staff that we need to safely operate a school. So I don't know, I wanted to put something together that I hope would make sense to people, because there's really a lot of confusion out there, and I take enough blame for stuff, and I don't want to take any blame when I don't have to. So, and Kelly Amick at the Health Department, she signed off on this, I signed off on this. The only question that I know of, our process, I feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable in supporting the health department, doing the contact tracing and supporting them in that. I feel comfortable in relaying their message of quarantine. It's not my message, but we're relaying their message. I feel comfortable in doing all of that. But the one thing that I think is could be questioned is the potential of the definition of the close contact. I think there's a little bit of discrepancy there, and it's not been consistent throughout the state. So that's the one part that I'm not real right now. This is exactly what it says and what we're following, but that has potential to change. Does anyone have questions about this? Because like I said, it's something that's...
Has the health department said whether, or do they even give us out? Are we going up? Are we going down?
They haven't indicated. So, they haven't indicated. We just follow the state, the map on it. What was that?
This, on that contact, or the close contact defined, the first bullet says was within 5 feet of someone who has COVID. I'm sorry, within 6 feet of someone who has COVID-19 for at least 15 minutes. Then the bottom one says was in the same class core group as a person with COVID-19. I could see a situation where a kid could be in the same classroom but 6 feet further apart. That seems a bit contradictory there. That they're saying that they have to, if they're within 6 feet, then yeah, they'd be quarantined. But And down here it says that if they're just in the same classroom,
That
I mean, in
is-
gymnasium.
That is correct. So that means that if you have 3 students in a class or you have 20 students in a class, they're going to quarantine the class.
Well, the first one says that they have to be within 6 feet of the person.
But
Maybe
if
they
you
won't
read
even-
on, it's
It
or,
says
or. Those are not
That's right.
ands, those are really ors in between that. So that means that, and that is the guidance that we have, that's the confusion. That's what's causing, throughout our state, I have talked to various superintendents who are, who are experiencing. The challenge comes when you have one county that does it one way and another county that does another. And then you have, families saying, well, but my family member that lives in this county didn't have to quarantine, but why are your kids quarantined? Well, it's not me, it's the health department. And that's their, as a superintendent, a very wise superintendent told me, they're the expert in healthcare, you're the expert in education. So I'm trying to keep it in that frame. I don't claim to be an expert in healthcare, never have, and don't claim to be.
But I can see where a kid could be in the same classroom, but not within 6 feet of that person. And it says that they have to be quarantined as well as, or if they were within 6 feet. So this might as well just say, if they're in the same classroom, they've got to be quarantined.
That is what they're saying. That is what our health department is saying. They're saying that if you are in the same bus, if you're on the same bus, or you're in the same class, you will quarantine.
It may be that first bullet is regarding buses and things like that, or lunchroom, or someplace else where you may be in contact with an individual that you don't have in your core group, or you're not in the same class.
I believe you're right,
That may be why
Mr.
they put
Moose.
that in.
I believe you're right. Bus, though, they are counting as a core group. But no, I believe you're right. So if you're in an outside, an open area, I believe that could be what it's referencing. The other, they're considering, they said any confined areas, classrooms, buses, they're using as the same class. That's the difference. But again, different counties are operating differently. And it's just nothing that I can control or any other school system, because we don't have the authority to quarantine anyone. But to help deliver and support, our local agency. And Kelly Amy has been absolutely wonderful to work with. So I don't want to say anything negative about her. She's been wonderful and continues to be.
But they actually kind of changed their policy since we voted on 4 days, isn't that right?
Well, the policy, no, there hasn't been any change in that.
I was thinking that they said it was okay to go ahead and,
Yes, we were told that, and there was nothing, according to the map, there was nothing that was presented to say otherwise. There was no evidence to say, why it wouldn't be supported, and still has not been. And I will reference that again. I did call the State Department of Education, and I did receive support from them. Also, I have posted an extension until October the 9th for students to be placed in distance learning or for face-to-face instruction. I know that the principals were pretty adamant that they wanted to get this moving quickly, and but my thought was, in light of our most recent COVID case, and of course we have had very minimal, I want to make sure that parents have enough opportunity to do distance learning if they choose to do that, and other parents to do in-face instruction. So I extended it until October the 9th. I also asked the health department if they could find funding for us to potentially test students for free at the schools if their parents choose to have them tested. And she said she would look for funding for that. I know that our other New River and Camden Clinic both have been very supportive and said they would help with services.
in testing. But again, the details on all of that, I don't know, but I do know that the health department has had some free clinics, testing clinics, and so that's why I was inquiring that when they do their free testing clinic, is it possible that that could spill over into our school system?
If they do opt to do that, you will post that on the website?
Yeah, oh, yes. I will get the information out, yes. One of the other things that I've tried to do is rumors move pretty quickly, and when you get a positive case, individuals tend to post it on social media as quickly as they can. At least that has happened in a few situations, and so I've tried to get out in front of it. So as soon as I'm notified, we contact the health department. I do get the principals on the phone quickly. We do try to get our game plan together quickly, get the notice out to everyone. I notify board members and get it posted on Facebook, and then as updates come in, then we try to update it. My fear of delaying will cause people to think that we are not being transparent, or that we are, I just think that delaying could cause more rumors to spread and cause more fear in the community. So I would rather get out in front of it if I can and provide as much information as I can, and then continue to update as we get additional information. So, and that's the way I plan to continue to do that unless this board sees otherwise.
Are you still looking at getting the plexiglass to surround the little ones?
We ordered.
I'm asking.
We did order that for our elementary grade levels, K through 5. So every elementary school, yes we did. So that's an extra thing that we wanted to put in place for our students and our staff.
What about preschool, since they're in our schools?
No, not the preschool, because the preschool, the reentry plan did not change for preschool. It stayed exactly as it was. They have their requirements with their spacing and things like that, so theirs is a little different. So, any questions on that? If not, I'll jump ahead to a couple other things. I know everyone's getting tired. Nothing else on that. So, pretty concerning. 4 years ago, we had 3,796 students in our school system, and today's count, we're down to 3,471, which is a loss of a total of $2 million in funding since that time. So this year, with us dropping our student numbers, we are down to, we're losing $962,800. So we've lost a total of, what is my number here? 166 students this year. And that's a tremendous amount. Now, there may be a little bit of movement this next week. We're not expecting much. Definitely not over 30 students, if that much. But 166 is a huge loss. We've been averaging 60 to 80 students every year. So we've doubled our numbers this time. Very concerning, and trying to keep up and manage the budget and try to keep from having our teachers in split grades is challenging, but we've managed to do that and keep our budget balanced.
Do you have a number on how many went homeschool and how many moved out of the county?
I do. Tammy Gregory's here. She actually has the numbers on all of that, and I think that will be helpful.
Okay, so last year I had about 245 students in homeschool. This year, after school started, I started calling, making phone calls, emails, trying to find kids. Some kids have graduated out. Some kids went back into the county. Some kids have moved out of the state and out of the county. So I got that number down to 184 of students that I had known students on my list. Then I had 93 students apply for homeschool this year, which took me to 277. So last year's number of 245, this year's number is 277, which is, 32 students more than we had last year.
That's cool.
Is that because you think of the coronavirus?
Yes, because many of
Definitely.
the applications say it is only for this school year. I plan to put my child back into to public school next year. A lot of it's due to the coronavirus, most of it.
So we have numbers, again, they'll be final, next week, Chris?
Next week, the principals have to complete their submissions by this Friday, and then we have a review period of the next couple of weeks for our county to review it before we have to submit it to the state. Then they go over it, and they may add or subtract some FTE to that, whatever they find. There could have been students that enrolled in multiple counties at the same time that we wasn't aware of, so they'll give that student to the county that they was really at. And so yeah, by the next board meeting, I think we'll have, I don't know that we'll have the final number from the state, but we'll have a final submission from our county to the state.
See, some of our, in looking at some of our big losses in enrollment, our elementary schools, our big elementaries have been hit pretty hard. For example, from last year to this year, Golly Rivers lost 37 kids, so that's 12%. We had Summersville Elementary lost to 44 kids, so that's 12.5%. In looking at the large numbers, so we've got Panther Creek lost 25 kids, so that's almost 11% of their
Just
population.
remember, these are preliminary numbers. I think about 40 some of those kids are below in the pre-K area. So that's where, if there's any change, that's where I look for the change to happen, is in the pre-K area, because they may not have those in there yet. But I think it was about 108 students from the K through 12 area that we've decreased, and that should be pretty close.
So that is, and then you've got Richwood Middle School lost 36 students, that's 16%. And then we had, that was your real big ones in loss. So again, it's bothersome because we still have to operate the schools. We still have to heat them, we still have to, cool them, and we still have to provide maintenance, and but yet we will have less money coming in.
You had 2 schools that picked up some students and one that stayed the same?
Yes.
What you're looking at?
Yes, Zila picked up 8, and so I'll go back and talk about that some also. So if you remember Summersville Elementary School, when we redistricted last year, that helped alleviate some of their
Well, not all of
overcrowding.
them went to Zelo, they did.
Some did, some went,
Some-
some went to Zila. Yeah, they went, yeah. And then, of course, that shows a positive then of 8 for Zila. And then Nicholas County High School, 0 change, so they didn't lose or gain any. But, yeah, so that's,
But this is not the official count.
it's not, no. So let's hope that it's not as bad as what this was reading.
I think that's worst case scenario is what you're looking at.
Yeah, let's just hope it's not as bad as what we're seeing. And you have that on in your packet. So you can see the numbers for each one. And any questions about that?
I don't know if this is really about that, but how is it panning out towards, since we went to the 4 days, the students that you gave them the option to either come to school 4 days or the virtual, is that?
I don't have all of those numbers. I would have to collect that, but I do know that our numbers increased because a lot of parents had wanted their children in 4 days a week versus 2 days a week because of childcare. I mean, it makes it easier. It makes it easier. And, you know, we have right now, we have some situations that, you know, some of our folks, I mean, staff members are losing babysitters and things like that. So I'm not denying them, I'm allowing them to bring their kids. I don't know what else to do. So, you know, at least our employees are getting a little bit of relief. I've not refused anyone from bringing their child. I mean, I know it's a little different, but it's a pandemic, and I'm trying to be as reasonable as I can. I've even gone so far as for our teachers who can do their work from home on Wednesdays. This is one of the few counties that's allowing. I've allowed the teachers to stay home and deliver their instruction because, again, childcare makes it easier. Makes it easier for them.
Did you say those numbers were in our packet?
Yeah,
Where? I mean, what are they?
it's online. It's online.
It's in Teams.
Oh,
It's in
okay.
Teams, yeah.
Yeah, it's
It was
online.
just added today.
I missed that.
If you want,
It's under final.
yeah, it's online. I mean, we can print you a copy if you want it.
So what can go on to-
Any questions about that? Anything
No.
else? And then I'll give you an update on construction. We have we had a visit last week at, no, it wasn't last week, it was Monday, wasn't it? At Cherry River Elementary?
Friday.
Friday, okay, it was last week. Yeah, Friday. So anyway, some of the board members did go and look at the site, and they were able to see, you know, where the playgrounds are going to be, and parking, and the footprint of the school and things like that. So I think that was kind of helpful for board members to see. Our DEP permit, all that's approved, so we're moving forward with construction at Cherry River. The Glade Creek area, we have, in having discussions with the architect, the area of disturbance has increased from 80 acres to 115 acres. And that's because of the site work, and so now what I will be requesting this week is a change in the scope of work to move from 80 acres to 115 acres, and to get the approvals needed for that. The other situation that I need to make this board aware of, and I will put it on the next agenda, is air evac. I had hoped that the building that air evac operates out of, that we'd be able to keep that building and repurpose it. But because we've moved to 115 acres instead of 80 acres, it has increased the amount of area that's needed for water collection. So therefore, there's going to be a dry pond located basically at the entrance of the Glade Creek Park. So when we have excessive rain, the overflow, it will drain into this dry pond and collect the water. The more area of disturbance you have, the larger the pond has to be. Therefore, the air evac, the building that I was hoping to preserve, will need to be demolished. And that entire area will need to be reduced to a crevice to collect water.
Is that the brick house?
Yes.
Those can be moved. They can be moved. If we had another location set on it, we thought we'd use that for some of
I like how small the
Coursework.
Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I thought about was doing something for the public, maybe law enforcement. You know, I thought about doing something like that. But then again, it would be maintenance. I mean, it's up to, if we don't remove, so what I was going to do is present something to the board. If this is what the architect is telling me, but I can put it on, ask in the next agenda and present it, a thorough review with you all. We can't lose sight of the purpose of the Glade Creek property, is to house the school and have all the amenities there versus saving the house that would, move away from that. Then that brings about the situation of air evac contract needing to be canceled. So I did speak to the air evac director today, and told him that the contractor is requesting February 1st as being able to have access to that property. Again, these conversations have just ensued as to the need for this new, this new pond, dry pond to be developed. And that if Air Evac holds the property until their July 1st timeframe, which the option to renew at 5 years, that would just delay us another 3 or 4 months in being able to move forward with construction. He was very nice, he was very reasonable, and I just told him I was reaching out to him to let him know of some thoughts, and he appreciated that, and he was contacting his corporate today. And he's going to get back with me tomorrow to see what type of issues that he may have. Then I called Fred Reed to make him aware of this possibility. I told him I would be mentioning it to the board tonight, and that making you aware of the possibilities of requesting to terminate the contract for Air Evac early. He understood. Of course, that's something that their whole board, he in no way, he said he would see no reason why anyone would want to try to hold up the progress of the schools. Septic system, relocation, again, we're working on that. The county building commission has agreed to pay half on the septic system relocation of Raider, who is, that septic system is on the property, which means that from the area of Raider's septic system, there is a tie-in, so there could be a pipe actually just connected from that to the city sewer system. So again, that's something that the building commission agreed to pay half to do on relocation. And last but not least, and what I've been working on today is there is also an issue that I will be asking for the discontinuance of a right-of-way. There's a right-of-way that travels across the Glade Creek property. It's a private right-of-way, personal right-of-way. And according to our architect, it will cause us a lot of issues if that right-of-way is left to remain, and challenging at best if it's even workable to leave it. So that's another thing that this board needs to be aware of.
That would be underground anyway, it'll be covered.
What's that?
That right away.
Yes,
When
with
they're
all
finished.
of,
Plus, they could use the road that we're going to build above it, same.
no, because, no, with going from 80 to 115, all of that, and he showed me that with the grade of the property and the way it's all going to be coming in, and with the fields and how the athletic fields and everything will be, there is absolutely no way to move it on around.
The right of way.
The right of way, no.
I mean-
Even by the cemetery, we have to stay 100 foot away from the cemetery. So even around the cemetery, it'll be coming around the backside, and all of that will be used for
The road
various
will be on the
things.
backside of the cemetery,
No,
on the front side.
no, the road will go up to the cemetery, but beyond that, all of that would be disturbed, and which would cut off the right of way.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah.
understand the right of way.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about, they could use that road we're going to put in, the new road. They could use that to go back to their property, couldn't they?
No, because beyond that, when it ends, everything else is going to be occupied with the fields and everything.
Okay, there'll be fields behind that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he has all of that, so as soon as the architect gets all of that put together, I'll be presenting it to you, and I'm hoping he's in the final stages of the last revision for the Cherry River campus. I was counting the other day with my classrooms, according to policy 6200, we were up to 937 student population on the Cherry River campus, and that excluded PE classrooms for middle, high school, and elementary. That excluded band for middle school, high school. That excluded art for middle school, high school. And that excluded like the CTE class for physical fitness and wellness. And it excluded choir for high school, middle school. So with those exclusions and not counting those who choose to go to the Career Center, we were already up to 937 students. So currently we have 767 students who would be on that campus. So I'm looking to make sure that We have everything completed according to policy 6200 and meeting all those standards, and presenting all that information to the board. And I'll be ready to answer any questions that you have, and I'll have the architect here as well. So, and if you guys can think of anything that you want me to address when I present that information, if you can let me know in advance to be prepared to get you that information, I'll make sure I have it. And I'm done, unless you guys are.
Any questions for the superintendent on her presentations this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 8 on the agenda this evening, and that is reports. Mr. Berry, do you have any?
No, we haven't had an opportunity to meet yet.
Okay, and I'm next to you on update on the policy, the pay policy. The financial statements have been done, so I'm going to get with Mr. Hess, Mr. Amy, you, me, the superintendent, and set up a meeting to move forward with that pay discussion. Okay? Mr. Hess, do you have any dates that you are available?
I'm available anytime.
Anytime? Okay, Madam Superintendent, I'll get with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what we were looking at anytime, we just haven't got that anytime all together yet.
Right. Well, they're working on that pay policy that we did talk about. And then you and Mr. Moose are going to work on that social media.
Yeah, we are. We've
We've
made our suggestions, and he's compiling them, and we're ready to.
Okay. All right. Then I look forward to hearing from you soon when you want to, you let us know when you're ready to bring something back. Anything else on that, Mr. Berry? Then item C there is the SESC meeting. Dr. Tetrick and I attended this past week. There was mainly some presentations to us. And there was a couple that I did find that they're pursuing. And one is on, it's called the villagecaregiving.com, which is it's an employment opportunity for our CNA students. So that might be something that can work out, because there's a lot of demand for caregiving, and getting some of these students to where they can have employment in that area. That was one thing that was presented to us, and there was another thing that was presented, was about image learning, and it's where kids learn math through the incentivizing process of earning points that go to charities like Red Cross, St. Jude's Hospital, that type of thing. These are just programs that they were presenting that the counties might consider utilizing, and so that was about all we did. It was pretty informative, plus they presented the financial statement. SESC is doing well financially, and that's mainly to do the good work of RESA 4 with their financial money we sent to them so that they can operate. So, any questions on SESC? Bright Horizons. Still have a meeting? Okay. All righty. Items for future agendas. Any items that board members like to see on future agendas? Okay, we'll move on to next meeting dates. You can see them listed October the 19th, regular meeting here. Monday, November the 2nd, a regular meeting here. On November the 10th, we have an LSIC meeting. It'll be at Panther Creek Elementary. And then we have a regular meeting for November the 16th here at the board office. Having completed the agenda, is there a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting?
So moved.
Mr. Amick moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Berry, second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Madam Secretary, we're adjourned at 7:40.